And back to the 54.19 trillion naira budget that has been passed by the National Assembly. We have, of course, a guest who will be sharing his thoughts on this. That is Gbolahan Olojede. Olojede is a financial management consultant. Thank you so much, Mr. Olojede, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's start with your general view on the budget.
Okay. First, I'm surprised that we're back to not being able to pass our budget by the end of the year. This is already, this is February, and the budget ought to have been signed into law by the end of last year. So I hope we can readjust and go back to being able to achieve that feat. Number two is the budget shows certain weaknesses within the system, and is an opportunity for us to, it is speaking to us that we need to look at certain distortions that have become obvious so that we can correct this distortion. So when you see the amount that is going for debt service ranking with the amount that is budgeted for capital expenditure, it's an indication that we need to do something on that nexus to be able to improve the revenues of the government. Contrary to some popular beliefs as well, I also think that the budget is still a very tiny amount, considering the size of the country and the population that we are told live in Nigeria. The education budget, that's what I've been using as my reference very recently. The education budget of South Africa for 2024-25 is an equivalent of about 25 trillion naira education budget. So, and that is a country of 60 million people. So the message there is that it should cause us to ask certain questions. For example, Nigeria is said to have regained its position as the largest economy in Africa. As the largest economy in Africa, how come our total budget is still 54 trillion naira? When a country with a smaller economy like South Africa, with 60 million people, is able to do about 3 or 4 times that number, it should cause us to ask certain fundamental questions. So I also have issues around whether we have approached our budget as a true planning document, or whether we just see it as an authority to spend, an appropriation document. That's something that authorizes people to spend. Since they say, oh, I can't spend if it is not in the budget. So, and there are elements within that budget system that shows that we lean more towards the latter, in which we see the budget as an authority to spend rather than a proper planning document. So those would be my initial thoughts about budget.
So what about the projections contained in the budgets? Do you share concerns that it's probably a little bit too ambitious?
There are a few very ambitious things about the budget. For example, we're talking about inflation, going down all the way to 10% or thereabout. I think it's a bit ambitious. I'm not sure we can achieve 15% in 2025. Maybe more realistically, if we can move from the 34, 35, all the way down to the 20s, it would have been a great achievement. But 15 is ambitious. Another assumption that may be a bit ambitious is a 2.06 million barrels per day of crude production. It is true that our crude production is starting to rev up, and I mean, we can congratulate ourselves on that. I still remember vividly that sometimes in 2022, our crude production went all the way down to below 1 million. We got as low as 930 something thousand barrels. But currently, we are doing in the neighborhood of about 1.5 million barrels per day. So that's a significant increase over that period. But can we take it further from 1.5 to 2 million this year? I'm not so convinced. Maybe 1.8, 1.7, 1.8. That looks more like it to me. So, on a personal opinion, I would think that our good assumption, production, may be ambitious. I know there are things we have been doing in that direction to ensure that we can increase production. For example, oil theft seems to have abated significantly. Then we have this situation in which domestic players are taking up assets that that were being left, are being sold by the international, and they will put those assets into use. I also see recently attempt to bring the Ogoni oil fields back into production. So all these measures definitely will help us to show up our oil production. But will we cross that 2 million barrels per day mark? I'm not so sure.
Okay,
the benchmark price.
Yes,
okay.
I just want us to quickly touch on the budget deficits before we wrap it up. 13.8 trillion naira and debt servicing 14.32 trillion naira. Is there any possibility that the gaps can be narrowed?
It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. However, this is the way it should normally play out. When you have that huge deficit, the primary funding way is to borrow. So while you have your borrowing plan, it shouldn't stop you from continually looking for solutions, innovating, looking for solutions that will reduce that amount that you have planned to borrow. So it is true, I plan to borrow 13 trillion or 14 trillion. But what I'm going to, try to do is to see if I can do something that will make me borrow only 10 trillion instead of 13 trillion. So what are those things that I could do? Am I going to sell some government enterprises, which is an opportunity to raise money? There is a whole lot of real estate issues that are out there, government real estate hanging all over the place, becoming mad people's houses all across the country, even on choice properties in the heart of Lagos. Federal government has property that it has not been able to do anything about. So there are assets, there are all those joint ventures with oil companies and the rest of them that we probably should also look at the possibility of being able to raise some funding via exiting some of our positions in these things. That way, we can see how we can reduce the deficit, financing the deficit through borrowing. The alternative, however, is to see what can we do to dramatically rev up the revenue. The reason why the deficit is that large relative to the total amount is because the revenue is still small. So if we're able to, along the way, bring on initiative that will improve the revenue profile, then the debt servicing or even the debt component of our entire funding becomes relatively, smaller. It starts to shrink because we are now having more revenue. So those are the two sides to look at what we can do as far as moderating that burden. But as it is today, it is burdensome when you have your debt service amount rivaling your capital expenditure for the period.
All right, thank you so much, Gbolahan Olojede, for sharing your thoughts with us looking at the 2025 budget. We appreciate that.